In this episode of Human Can Opener, I'm joined by People Make Games co-founder Chris Bratt. Most of you will probably know Chris from the two documentaries the PMG have published on the seemingly bottomless pit of drama and intrigue, which has come as a result of ZAUM Studios' battles in the court of law and of public opinion. Chris and PMG did a huge amount of work to uncover much of the detail in this story, revealing most of it for the first time to us dedicated fans. But they also did face a huge amount of scrutiny for the overall message they communicated in their first documentary. We talk a lot about that first documentary and the responses to some of that criticism, and how those events influenced the production of the follow-up documentary. And we explore in greater detail some of the challenges Chris and the team faced, not just in their work on ZAUM, but the channel as a whole. If you are seeing Human Can Opener for the first time, or perhaps you're returning from a hiatus, this is a good time to remind you that this is part of a new season of the podcast, and the channel has a whole bunch of episodes covering interviews with other creators, journalists, and game developers. You can check those out by following links to the relevant playlists in the video description, or going to the homepage of the channel. Okay, that's the admin piece done, and now it's time to enjoy an interview with People Make Games co-founder Chris Bratt. Okay, hello, Chris Bratt from PMG. Thank you very much for joining me.
David. Do people call you David on here, Mr. Precinct? The 41st? I don't know how to refer to you.
Generally, people say David now, okay, because unfortunately my name has managed to escape into the public stratosphere.
Yes, it's down there somewhere, isn't it?
Yeah, no hiding place anymore. So, Chris, you are probably one of the more recognizable faces in the Disco Elysium story, and wider entertainment platform that is YouTube. I mean, you didn't just do Disco Elysium stuff, but you are a founder and the face of People Make Games. But for those who maybe don't know who you are, Chris, why don't you just give us a introduction to who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm one of the co-founders of PMG, which is a fancy way of saying that I was one of the people that started this YouTube channel. We are on other platforms outside of YouTube, but it's primarily a publication that exists on there. And before that, I've been a games journalist for, I think, about a decade now or something. Like one of those numbers that within this particular industry feels like a lifetime. People tend to stick around for very long. And I think that is typically how I see myself, like a reporter first and a YouTuber second. Those two worlds interact with each other in interesting ways, and I definitely am aware that like being on YouTube has changed the kind of job that I have and the role that I have. I tend to think of myself though as I'm a reporter that works at People Make Games. There's a couple other people on the team. I founded it with Annie, who is the person who does all the visual work for the channel and is the reason why I think a lot of our kind of professionalism comes from her abilities, honestly, more than anything else. So we're very thankful for that. And I am the main face of the channel, but we also work with other reporters, sometimes like the main other one being a guy called Quinns, who people might know for, in particular, like his Roblox work, I think is probably maybe out in this community, in like, we're known for Disco Elysium, but I think generally that's probably one of the bits of work that we are actually most known for more widely. But that's what I do. I'm a reporter at People Make Games.
Nice. Just the Roblox video actually is probably your biggest video on the platform, right? And
my God,
you had a lot of heat for it from Roblox as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's a really interesting story to look back at now. So we actually did two videos about 5 years ago. We did a piece looking at Quinns was the face of it, although I worked on it here and there, and Annie obviously again made it look professional. But that piece, that first one, was kind of examining Roblox as a platform that people make money on, and at that point in particular, like the majority of the creators on Roblox were children. And even then, even 5 years ago, it was absolutely massive, but it was one of those things that people that cared about games that were kind of our age maybe knew almost nothing about it. They were aware that it was like this behemoth that was like growing in a different part of the internet. But we were one of the first outlets to really examine the sort of relationship between Roblox Corporation, the company, and the children that were making the games on that platform. And we discovered that, unsurprisingly, a group of people like that who aren't going to have a lot of collective power and not or a collective voice to speak with, it's quite easy to exploit a group like that. And in fact, that was the angle that we took. We were examining the ways in which we felt Roblox Corporation was exploiting its sort of young creators. These days, you think like on YouTube, right? Like there's so much conversation around the relationship between YouTube as a platform and its creators. Like YouTubers love talking about it. We're having a moment right now where there's maybe something happening with view counts on certain channels. We absolutely love that stuff. We'll talk about that to death, and we have the platform to do it. The children predominantly that were making Roblox games didn't really have that, and particularly if you were in that level that like some people making games that were enormously successful, but the many people underneath that, there were interesting ways in which that relationship just simply wasn't fair. We later came back to that story after Roblox sort of pressured us to remove that video unsuccessfully, and because of all the attention it got, a lot of people came forwards to us to talk about things like abuse on the platform and the complete lack of moderation. And now today, which is really on one hand gratifying because it means that we did the work right, but also extremely depressing. It's in the news like every week, right? The ways in which Roblox is being challenged for failing. I mean, there are multiple lawsuits happening right now about grooming and abuse on the platform or adjacent to the platform, and parents are going after Roblox for the way in which they feel the company let down the children on that were using it. And we kind of talked about that in its early stages 4 or 5 years ago, and that I think is what people most know us for, because those videos have done just so many more views than anything else. It's insane.
That's a good reminder actually as well, just on PMG in general, particularly for this audience, that there is a whole raft of amazing content on your channel, which for those that maybe complained about, and we will talk about it later, complained about certain aspects of the disco videos, should go and watch that and understand actually where your hearts and minds are at in the arguments. And it's funny actually, we talk about this, and it's the last point I'll make, but my son has just discovered Roblox Studio. He's only 10. And it's a difficult one because I obviously have an understanding of how dangerous a company Roblox can be in that kind of relationship, but he's creating and he's taking steps into a world which could, be a huge door for him. So it's very difficult.
We move on from Roblox in just a second. The way I have thought about it, we've recently Annie, who does all the graphics for People Games, is also my partner. We went all in. We started a company together and now had a kid together. It's
People make babies. Is
exactly. I think weirdly we had to tell our audience that we'd had a baby because of the way that we're funded. That was a whole thing. Anyway, the way that I've been thinking about it with Roblox particularly, because people sometimes come up to me and say, I'll never let my kid on Roblox, which I think is a very understandable take if you've watched that work and seen the reporting that's followed it in other places. I would say the way I kind of land on it is there are no platforms on the internet at any sort of scale that don't come with these enormous problems. If your kid at 10 years old wanted to start a YouTube channel, that can be creative and cool and interesting and exciting. You'd also have some serious reservations about the way in which he's interacting with an audience and who it is that's watching his stuff and all the rest of that. I think the big difference up until more recently is that YouTube has been challenged quite a lot. There are people that can hold YouTube to account, sort of. Roblox went through a really long stretch, particularly around the sort of pandemic era, where it was blowing up. It was becoming really, really big, but no one was really holding it to account in the same way. That's the main difference. So I think I don't think Roblox should be,
banned
pieces, banned. But I think it needs proper, there needs to be a way of making that company treat people well and care about the enormous responsibility it has. That's sort of where I learned it.
Yeah. Okay, so this is now a Roblox podcast.
Yes,
Clearly.
I know. I've got
So, I mean, look, I mean, the answer to my next question is kind of in what we've talked about already. But yeah, how would you personally describe what People Make Games is and what its aims are? When, and I guess I'm coming back to like when that conversation was happening, on like, okay, we're going to start this thing. What was the goal at that stage?
Yeah, so I think there's two sides of that. I've never been that good at like succinctly describing what we do, but I'd say on one side, I definitely think that People Make Games is meant to be a publication that cares deeply about more long form investigative journalism in the game space. It's not always video games, but it's largely video games. And the games media, as you may know, how do you feel about swearing on this? I know other people have.
Swear all you like, yeah.
The games media landscape is fucked. It's been fucked like as long as I've been doing this work, but it feels in a particularly bad spot right now. There's been a huge contraction. There are fewer jobs than ever. There's been there are fewer games websites, and those games websites are owned by a smaller handful of companies. Those are serious problems. And I think what's come with that is that games journalism often hasn't had a lot of budget or resource allocation for like individual stories. People do it, definitely. There are some amazing journalists out there doing good reporting. Some of that is just off their own back, or they have to fight for it within the company. And what we have tried to do with PMG is like, is there a business model and a way of structuring this thing where really the only thing we do is like long form work that takes a really long time, and that we can, if needed, like put the kind of budget into it that makes sense. I'll give you a really small example of this. The Disco Elysium story is certainly part of that. I think we were able to spend a lot longer on Disco than other game journalists have or had. But even on like, there are smaller stories, like for example, I don't know if you remember, several years ago there was a Hearthstone player called Blitzchung. He lives in Hong Kong, and during an esports tournament, he I think he won his game, and then in the post-match interview he called for the liberation of Hong Kong. This was just before the pandemic, and the sort of relationship between China and Hong Kong. There were mass protests like every week. It was a huge part of his life, and so he used his space as an esports athlete to call attention to that, and immediately got banned by Blizzard, and even the people like casting the event did, and that was covered across the board. Like everyone covered that story. It was really interesting. But the thing we tried to do, the way I kind of see a People Make Games version of a story like that, is we went to Hong Kong to meet him in person and spend some time with him. And I'd say that's just, if having worked at other websites, you can't get the budget to do that. You can't get the resources to be like, hey, there's this interesting story that feels like it's really worthwhile. What about instead of just like getting a quote or reporting on what we know already, what if we went over there and met him? And yeah, just simply because of the business model as much as anything else. Usually in the games media, the answer to that is like, are you kidding? Like, how would we possibly see a return on that? So with PMG, we've tried to set up the whole thing where we can either spend more time or more resources to do stories in a more involved way, I guess is the idea. And then on the other side of it, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit. I told you I wasn't very good at this. The other thing, the name, I guess, came from the fact that I came up in the games media around the time that things like Gamergate had happened, and I'd seen the ways in which game developers, just people across like the games industry, were often dehumanized and targets of harassment campaigns and all the rest of it. And I felt like part of where that's coming from, there's a lot going on there for sure, but like part of the reason was that because of the relationship that the games media has with the games industry, we usually do like a preview event, a review, and the interviews that we have are very like, there's a PR in the room, and there's only a number of things we can talk about. It's all got to be our message. We tried to like have this ethos of like, doing work that reminds our audience that it's actual human beings on the other end of this, and that for better or worse, they're humans just like you, and maybe if we can do something to like remind our audience of that, it might help fight some of this rising bullshit. I will say we probably ultimately failed because like
no, I disagree actually.
Well,
I was going to remark that the name of the channel immediately invokes that in me, so I suppose at least in name you're conveying that.
Yeah, no, I was being flippant there. I think we do
take
that seriously. I guess generally speaking, I think the games industry still has a significant problem with that exact thing in the same way that when we started. So I suppose I don't know how much we've moved the needle, I guess is what I was saying, but I was maybe being a bit flippant.
Well, I mean,
calling me out there.
you wouldn't be someone of integrity if you weren't continuously questioning whether you're doing enough. I always think that as a parent, like if I'm always feeling like I haven't done enough, then that's probably a good sign because you're always striving to do better. And as I think you apply that to most things. It's interesting that you mentioned controversial political commentary coming out of the games space, because I imagine there's probably some mileage in a certain Insomniac former staffer who lost their job this week on the back of.
I mean, it's just constant. I think right now what started off as, I mean, a lot of very smart people already talked about this, but what we saw a genesis of or an evolution of in movements like Gamergate is now just the entire experience of using the internet. It feels like, particularly right now. I think it's difficult. Telling those stories brings its own unique stresses, different to like the stresses we'll probably talk about with like a disco piece, but like to talk about that, I need to go out and speak to the people who are, on the ground with this stuff, who are experiencing it themselves, and just putting a spotlight on them, even from a channel whose audience is likely going to be very sympathetic to the issues that they're facing. Like, for example, someone who's been fired in that situation, although I don't know the full details of what happened there. But even speaking to anyone who's been on the receiving end of a campaign in the game space, you put a spotlight on them that can blow up into this whole other thing. Like we did a piece on Valve, like what it's like working at that company a few years ago, which I am really proud of. But it went down well when we first published it, and years later, the fact that it refers to the internal response to Black Lives Matter, which was an interesting thing that people at the company wanted to tell me about. Like that ended up became the target of one of these campaigns like years down the line. And I'm really glad that we didn't have anyone in front of camera who they could, aside from me, which wasn't super pleasant, but though I didn't interview anyone that they could latch onto as like, cool, let's go after this person, try and get them fired from Valve.
But I mean, you touch on a good point there, Chris, because quite often with the work you do, that's you, as you say, you're the face, you're the guy who's, subjecting themselves to a lot of this stuff. And I think it's just worth pointing out that perhaps people forget how much bravery that takes and how much resilience, because it would be very easy, given how hot the topics are and some of the stuff you've had to face over the years, be very easy for you to just go back to a desk job, right? And just get it.
I think on one side, something that I mentioned in the second Disco documentary, that it comes with territory, and it probably should, which is that if we have the ability to tell people's stories, particularly when they're really important, defining stories of some of these people's lives, we should, and I should be someone that can be held to account as well in response to that. It can obviously get a little out of hand when it's like, particularly when you touch on things to do with Gamergate and that side of the culture. But I think it just comes with that territory. And I also think it kind of, in terms of like we could, I guess, pick stories that have less controversy in, and we definitely do that sometimes. I sometimes swing between like doing a Disco Elysium documentary and then following some farming simulator sports players around Germany. Like and it helps me kind of take a break from that,
Yeah.
and I'll let our audience take a break from the heavy stuff as well, honestly.
Yeah.
But I found that given that we do have this like amazing opportunity where we can kind of pick whatever stories we want, if we don't go after stuff that feels important every so often, it actually drives me crazy, and I feel like I'm just wasting, like, this is the one shot I have of doing this work, and I couldn't really ask for any more support than we have now. Like, we're a small team, but we get to work on exactly the pieces we want to when we want to, and like if I don't do something that feels a bit worthwhile with that, I just I just get really anxious and frustrated.
Yeah. Understandable. It's passionate work that you do, so yeah, it doesn't surprise me one bit.
I'm just anxious, man, honestly, David. That's the main thing. That's what you'll find throughout all of this interview.
Well, you do a very good job of masking it, if that's the case, Chris. I'll give you that. And maybe that's one of the methods and techniques that maybe people aren't aware of. I was going to ask you about that. You talked a little bit about Annie, who does a lot of the visual work, which is outstanding, by the way. And you're right to point out just how good that is. I'm always, in fact, like I caught up on both of your documentaries prior to doing this, and I was just like the whole time watching, like, this is really good. But you of course, make call outs occasionally to the Patreon, and highlight some of the challenges you have with trying to reach these stories. But I wonder, is there anything that maybe you don't talk about that is a constant kind of thing for you and a constant challenge?
I guess so I think we talked about it a little before, and I guess I do mention this, but I think the full extent of it is probably one of the more invisible parts of the work, similar to Annie's, like the time investment that Annie's work requires. You just kind of see the end result of it rather than the weeks or months of like graft that goes into putting that together. But I think the time investment on some of the stories would maybe surprise people. We're working on one at the moment about, there's the World of Warcraft team at Blizzard have just unionized. In fact, quite a lot of Blizzard has unionized now, but we're following the I have mentioned this to our patrons, but it's not something we've talked about that publicly. It doesn't really matter. We're following the World of Warcraft union as it tries to secure its first contract. So basically it goes from being a union that has come together, which is great, to actually like achieving a significant improvement to the lives of the people working there. And that's a story that we're going to follow them until the end of that process, which could be, I don't even know. It's almost certainly not going to be this year. I imagine some point next year. We've been working on that story since the beginning of 2025. I visited them in Irvine in California twice, and I have like almost weekly calls with members from that union, which aren't interviews, which are just like ways of me keeping on top of the story to make sure that we know what we need to hit next. And like 90% of that work you'll never see in the final piece, but without it, we wouldn't have a clue what we're doing. So I think that's probably one of the things that when we're doing our work well, people won't realize is that you have to be able to just spend a lot of time with these stories, kind of become just like entirely obsessed with them for a little while, which is not always the healthiest thing. I sometimes come out the other side of a People Make Games piece, and like definitely with the Disco Elysium pieces more than most, like gasping for air at the other side. Like I've just been caring about this stuff so much for such an intense period of time, and then like I think you actually very kindly asked me to be on your show after a while ago now, maybe a year or two ago.
It was at least last year, I think.
And partly I was preparing myself to like do the second piece and want to kind of have our own go at like reflecting on the first documentary before we and it made sense to talk to you after that had happened. So I kind of had collected my thoughts, but also it's I sometimes get to the end of a story and I'm just like, I want to think about anything else other than what I've just been like obsessed about for the last few months. So I think that's maybe one of the interesting bits. And what's the question? The question was like other challenges that people don't know about with the work rates more generally. I suppose the other one, which we've talked about a little bit here, but we talked about a little bit, in the aftermath of our second documentary. But there are expenses that people might not expect. I guess a big one that happened with our second disco doc is, I think we spent about £3,500 on legal advice to be able to get that out the door, because we were well, we had to. We'll maybe get into the reasons for that later on.
Yeah.
A part of why I wanted to, I posted about that on social media, was to try and give people an idea of like what goes into those kind of stories and why you don't see that many of them in the games media. Again, having worked at 2 other places before this, if you ask for that kind of budget, some places like fortunately have their own legal departments as part of a bigger company. Like that's an ideal situation to be in. Certainly if you're at like somewhere like Bloomberg, like Jason Schreier or something like that. But for an independent outlet, it's a massive expense and is going to be the difference between some people even taking a swing at something like that or not.
Yeah, lot of risk as well, isn't there? Yeah,
a little bit of risk. Yeah, we're a limited company. That's that. We weren't for a little while when we first started, and that isn't a protection against everything, but it does feel nice that People Make Games as a business and my house where I live are somewhat disconnected.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
That will only get me so far, but there's if we did face an expensive lawsuit, which we haven't yet, touch wood, but could well happen at some point. It's no joke. Like it will be a huge moment for People Make Games.
Yeah, they're serious business. Okay, so I mean, we talked already about some of the challenges you face, so I won't dwell too much on that. But I am interested. I've got a pretty strong portfolio now, Chris. This is like probably asking you to choose your favorite child, but which documentary in the roster is your favorite, or what are you most proud of? Because I guess favorite and most proud of could have different connotation. What are you most proud of?
Thankfully, I only have one child, so my favorite child is named Dylan. He's pretty great. I think I don't know. There are lots of for different reasons, but I'll give you an answer. I think something that has been on my mind recently, because it might be something we're going to come back to as well, was in November of 2023, about a month after the Hamas attacks had happened. We did a piece on the games industry's relationship with Palestine, basically a call to action for people in games to speak up about what's happening. And today in 2025, as we've like literally had the genocide in Gaza just live streamed onto our phones for 2 years straight, I think a lot of people are much more comfortable speaking up about that. It's difficult in professional settings sometimes, I think, in games maybe, but personally, I think it's much more common for people to use their platform to talk about it. I would say in November of 2023 that wasn't the case. It was the reason we made the video is like there'd been just almost silence on it. And we worked with Timur Hussein from GameSpot and Giant Bomb to put together a video kind of explaining why that's weird for this industry that does like respond to certain moments like Black Lives Matter, like Me Too, and then suddenly is like deathly quiet on this. Actually, the Ukraine example is a pretty salient one, because so much money had been raised to support Ukrainians after the invasion, and yet on Palestine there was nothing. And so Timur did a really great piece with us talking about that, interviewing a Palestinian and making the case for why it matters. And it raised like $70,000 for a Palestinian charity.
Amazing.
And it was just the thing that I'm proud of there is I'm proud of Timur for like he took a big risk like professionally to speak on that. It definitely comes with its own pressures. There were people trying to get him sacked from his role at GameSpot for talking about it. And and now when we see things like the boycott that's been called against Xbox and people, charity efforts in the games industry, what I'm proud of there is that Timur agreed to work with us, and we talked about it in 2023 rather than
and waiting for the zeitgeist to
I think so,
to give that space. No, fair play. And I agree with you, actually. It is strange that now there's only the comfort levels have only just started to become a bit more, I mean,
common. You see it everywhere. It's not just in games, certainly. And but it was it was interesting to look back at that.
Yeah, I spoke about it recently, actually, on another episode, and the fact that there seems to be, I've never known such a disconnect between the general public discourse amongst everyone, in the general public versus kind of institutions, and why there still seems to be this reluctance to call it what it is in government, etc. Not least our own, Chris, but that is
Jesus
a whole
Christ. Yeah.
That's a whole other rant, I think, which will definitely take us past 2 hours if we go down that. So, not that we don't want to talk about it, but we must control ourselves a little bit. Otherwise, I fear we would get into rant. So, thank you very much for giving me those answers, Chris, about what is, something you're very personal and attached to, and that is your work. But I really want to know all about Disco Elysium and the.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked to know that. What? This is a podcast just about me.
By now, I think we can call the first documentary infamous. And I think I don't think that's too unfair. I think you'd probably agree with me. So I am curious though, what initially drew you to that story, Chris, and how much of it did you understand going into it? I mean, and I guess I'll just add another element to that, is like, how much of a fan of Disco Elysium were you at the time, and whether that played a role?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely a fan of Disco Elysium. I will say I talked about this with another podcast once, but like having like been so obsessed in these two documentaries and like just professionally the impact of it, I don't know that I can go back and play the game now without like it bringing up a bunch of like work thoughts, which sucks because it's obviously an incredible game. I would say to begin with, I didn't know much about what was happening. Nobody really did. The moment where I've kind of first started seeing if this is a story we could do, I guess the Martin Liga post, that was, we want to talk about infamous, there's another infamous moment. Martin Liga's post announcing the dissolution of the ZAUM Cultural Collective and suddenly revealing to the world that Kovitz and Rostov and Himper, I think he also points out in that one, that they'd all been forced out of the company. That had happened. We saw the follow-up response from Kovitz and Rostov accusing ZAUM's management of having committed fraud and stolen ZAUM from underneath them. The response from ZAUM had come in, which was the allegations against their behavior. And I think also by that point, everyone had kind of covered that in terms of these things have happened. These posts are like crazy. What the hell's going on? And I think I'd also maybe seen a gamesindustry.biz article at that point, which was one of the definitely at that time one of the only pieces that had interviewed anonymously some employees from ZAUM about whether or not these allegations against Kovitz in particular had any truth to them. And as I guess it was probably a precursor to what would happen, they did point out that there was frustration within the team towards, in particular, Robert. And that article also got its own like backlash, I remember, from people who were frustrated by, that being the angle. And that's all that had really happened, I think. And so at that point, what I thought we were going to do, and I try not to enter any story with too many preconceptions because they tend to get you into trouble. I thought we were telling a piece that was going to be almost entirely about the alleged financial fraud. I guess for people who are familiar with the first piece, the first chapter of that video, which is like the untangling of all the different companies that exist within ZAUM and the ownership of Disco Elysium, I thought that was probably going to be the main thing that we talked about.
And it is excellent, by the way, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. I think
it really is incredible. Yeah,
it's definitely one of the strongest bits of the documentary. So I went into it assuming, like many people in the wider Disco Elysium audience, that was the the be all and end all of the story. I try not to have that kind of preconception, but I figured, okay, let's, as a starting point, let's try and answer, is this true? That was what I was going in with, and that was the entry point. I don't remember exactly when that will have been. I guess in the aftermath of the things I just described, probably in the aftermath of the gamesindustry.biz article somewhere around then.
Yeah, I can't even remember dates now. There's been that many.
Oh, it's
different.
teenagers.
Yeah, it's quite. It's such a minefield. But I mean, just to again, I just want to point out again something that goes a huge credit to you is actually, you're right. We didn't know much about the story at all until you guys shed light on it. It's a seminal piece, I think, and I probably wouldn't be sat here now with the work that I'd done had it not been for your documentary in the first place. I certainly probably wouldn't have spoken to Argo and Dora about
interesting
the things that I talked to them about. So I mean, going in there and it's amazing how you did manage to untangle what was a huge web of stuff that really you would really struggle to work through. But what were some of the first steps you had to take when you were going into it, Chris?
Yeah, so I think my first thing that I wanted to do was probably speak to Robert Kurvitz and Alexander Rostov, given the post they did was just so dramatic, and it sounded like they were pretty sure of themselves to be able to use the kind of language they did. It caught everyone off guard. I was like, I need to speak to those guys in a way that will be the difference between this piece happening or not, I suppose, is like getting them on the record about this. And initially I actually wrote a letter to Robert Kurvitz and Rostov, I guess, and they used to live in I live in Brighton. They used to live in Hove, which is like Brighton Hove is like for people outside the UK, is two towns that became a city together. So basically, round the corner almost from where I live, they used to live. And at the time, I wasn't sure if they still were at that address. So I had tried to contact them via email and other means and just heard nothing back. So I delivered a letter as to that address saying, hey, this is who I am and I'd love to talk to you. And again, heard nothing. So basically on all fronts, had failed to get in contact with them. And on ZAUM's side, I don't even know if I had initially, at what point I reached out to them, but the feeling overall was, this is an ongoing lawsuit. No one wants to speak about it because it's ongoing, and they want to concentrate on the court case and not land themselves in any kind of hot water by agreeing to a press interview that ends up backfiring for whatever reason. The moment that changed for us, and the reason we were able to do the story in the end, is I decided to go to Estonia to attend one of the hearings. This is in the case that has now been resolved, in which Robert Kurvitz was requesting access to financial documentation from ZAUM. He says to make a case that some kind of fraud has happened. That case was ongoing at the time, and so I went along to one of the hearings with an Estonian translator who we contracted in Tallinn. And so I sat there in the hearing and understood nothing of what was happening other than vibes, which was quite a fun experience. And then afterwards, my counterpart talked me through all of her notes and what had just happened. And then I started speaking, to begin with, off the record with employees at ZAUM about their own experiences. And those two things in conjunction ended up opening the doors to the bigger interviews, which was like that I'd gone to the hearing, and I think actually the way it happened was I'd gone to the hearing. I started speaking to quite a number of ZAUM employees off the record without the permission without going through the company itself. And eventually ZAUM's management get wind of that, get in touch with me and say, like, hey, what's going on over there? And I explained what I'm doing, and that I've also been following the hearings in person, and that kind of opened the door to a first interview with them, which then eventually opened the door to interviews with Robert Kurvitz and the opposing side, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting knowing everything we know now, that how it didn't take them long, the bosses of the company, to kind of get wind of it and start asking what you were up to.
I suppose, to be charitable, I don't think that's actually that unusual in the work that I do when I reach out to employees anonymously, unless there are. It kind of depends on the topic, but I'd say in my experience, if you're doing a story on a studio where you want to speak to, anonymously different employees, you can start doing that, and you begin with the employees that you think are least likely to take that any further, that you think will probably have there's an amount of trust there, or you can, which is always a guess anyway. Honestly, the more people you speak to, there is just a tipping point where at some point people tell their management what's going on, because they're worried that if they are found out to have spoken to you, that it's going to affect, that they're going to get in some kind of professional trouble. And I ended up speaking to a lot of people for the Disco Elysium one, so it wasn't that surprising to me when they got in touch. What was surprising is that they were interested in being interviewed. They were pretty keen to do that on the management level. But yeah, I at that point I'd spoken to enough people that I'm like, I'm sure they know by now.
Unsurprised. I mean, I think their finger is definitely on the pulse anyway. So what was the hardest moment for you during the production of the documentary, Chris? Be it emotionally, logistically? What hurdles? Anything that springs to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say emotionally, it's definitely one of those stories that you feel like you're really getting involved in people's lives, and that the work is going to have an impact on a lot of people that are involved in the story, and that should bring with it an amount of stress and apprehension. I feel like whenever I speak to journalists who don't feel that, I'm always a little cautious of what is driving the work. I think you should feel a responsibility that we're going to publish something that's probably going to change someone's life in a meaningful way, or add to some stresses. I'll give you I don't even mean any particular person from this first one, but even in the second one, I am aware, for example, when we publish our piece, that Riaz Muller, who we'll talk about later on, he's going to be pretty stressed out about this work, and it's going to have an impact on his life. I don't think that should mean I pull any punches in terms of the reporting around his involvement in the story, but I like to think about that. And so emotionally, I would say on both of the Disco Elysium ones, I'm aware that we're really, sort of trawling through some very personal memories for and interactions for these people. So that's definitely part of it. But by far, the most grueling part of working on the first one was the edit itself. And we'll get onto this when we talk about some of the criticism it's received. But it was a 2-hour documentary. At that point, I don't think we'd ever done one that long. I don't think we've done one that long. Oh, it's 2.5 hours. Sorry. Yeah. The closest we've come to doing that again is hilariously the second Disco Elysium documentary, which was meant to be 40 minutes when I first pitched it to the rest of the team here. So, it's a 2.5 hour documentary. There's so much going on in it. There's so many people involved. There's so many moving parts, and it was just a real challenge, a real slog to get all of that into a format that felt interesting to people, that held the attention of the audience, and that felt fair to everyone involved, and that wasn't really fucking confusing to watch. Because even that first section, which, thank you for saying you liked it. I really think it's one of the chapter, untangling the mess of companies, really one of the best parts of the documentary. Pretty hard to follow, and certainly by the time you get to the end of the 2.5-hour documentary, if I were to quiz you on what you'd learned in that first chapter, it would be pretty like hard going to recall everything, because it's just a very messy story, and we found that just so challenging to put together. I'll save the rest of my thoughts onto that when you inevitably ask me about
of course, And now everybody knows why I didn't bother editing my 16-hour interview, because I was like,
maybe that's how I should have done it.
I said, fuck this, you either like it or you don't. That is an indication of how much less professional I am than PMG. So don't ever forget just how much better they are. So, I mean, there's a whole mix of characters in this story, some of which I've had the pleasure of speaking to, some of which I have not, some of which, without meeting them, I have strong feelings on, and again, flip it the other way. I'm genuinely interested in your personal experience with some of these people. There are controversial characters in there. I mean, Robert, for instance, is a divisive character, one that people feel passionate about. But what was your experience dealing with, like, going from an Argo to a Robert to a Thomas to an Ilmar, and obviously the staff in between?
So to tie back to what I just said, there's a lot of people there to keep track of and to represent in the story, and that presents its own challenges. There's just a lot of ground to cover to begin with, and it's part of why we structured it in the way that we did, kind of giving certain space to like an interview that we'd had before moving on to the next, just because there's so many people involved and they all feel very distinct. I will say, actually, in terms of the reporting itself and the work that we need to do, more than anything, they are all so interesting. I think particularly on the Estonian front of this story, the backstories of almost all of the people involved are just so full of life and at times just batshit crazy. Obviously there's things like Thomas Harvel's criminal history in Estonia. You've got the controversy surrounding Kaukenda's novel entitled 12. I don't know if you've ever read any of that.
I haven't read it. I know the nature of it, and I know some of the stuff that Kau has said since. I
mean, it's extremely graphic, and since, again, whether this is true or not, I don't know, but it's certainly interesting that, like, this is a man that went to court and caused national scandal in order to defend his right to publish what the Estonian state was trying to describe as child pornography. It's an extremely graphic novel about a character who, for the sake of your YouTube backend, I'll avoid using some of the words to describe that.
Yes.
If you need to. It's a very graphic book. It's very shocking. It's very disturbing. He goes to court to defend his right to publish this, like, grotesque novel. Estonia, as a, like, cultural society, responds to this moment, and people come out who don't even like the work or necessarily, but they come out to defend his right to publish it. There are people that say he's, poisoning the minds of the readers, like, massive debates. He risks going to jail in order to publish this, and then years later, after I should say he successfully won that case and was not charged with producing child pornography, years later, out of nowhere on a video game forum, he suddenly reveals that he alleges that Robert Kurbitz in fact wrote the book and he'd never even read it. Like, that is such a crazy, like, story that almost doesn't have much to do with the rest of what we have to talk about, but it paints a picture of these people that are just, they're incredibly interesting. You look at the ZAUM Cultural Collective and the Overcoats and the history of all of this. It's just so full of life and personality, and unlike most video games, like, stories you get to hear about. So I'd say, more than anything, my experience dealing with all these different kinds of characters, it was just very interesting. Obviously, if you're asking for my, like, personal take on meeting some of them, I don't know is that what you want me to?
Yeah, if you would mind.
I try not to do too much of this because obviously.
That's why I asked.
Yeah, I meet these people in a very specific moment, and for some of them, it's when they're having to respond to like very serious allegations that could affect the rest of their lives, and so that's not necessarily a all-encompassing.
You're not getting to know them as such, are you? Yeah.
But within that context, I would say Ilmar Compass was, as you see in the documentary, he's corporate, civil, seems better prepared for the interview and what he wants to say or needs to say in it than some of the others. He comes across calmer than most of the other people in the story, and I think you can draw a whole bunch of conclusions from that. But it's certainly interesting. Robert Kurvitz is like a very, almost a polar opposite to him. He's like raw and emotional and feels very frustrated and lets a lot of that bubble up to the surface in a way that someone like Ilmar might not. We talk about it a bit in the first documentary, but like by the time he sort of commands a lot of the conversation when you speak to him, in my experience. It kind of, you can see it in the piece where like we interview him and Alexander Rostov at the same time, but Rostov doesn't really say very much. And that's kind of an interesting dynamic to be around. And also, we obviously end up asking him things that he feels very frustrated about, particularly when we bring up the experiences that we've heard from some of the other ZAUM employees, in particular Argo, having kind of spoken out about his behavior. He finds that very difficult to deal with. And yeah, by the end of the time speaking to him, like this person who has a lot to say kind of shut down on us and didn't want to speak at all by the end of the conversation.
Seeing as you've mentioned that, my sources tell me that you had an interesting experience after the interview was finished. How was?
Oh yeah, that's kind of what I'm talking about. Basically, he didn't really want to speak to us after the interview had finished, which is fine. And if he feels frustrated with the questions that we've asked, he's absolutely allowed to do that. What makes it a bit awkward, particularly when you're filming a documentary, is that, like, you finish your interview, and unlike in this conversation that we're having right now, that we press end meeting and we get to like walk away and sort of decompress in our own time. We had a bunch of camera equipment and lights that we then need to unpack, and we're doing it in kind of almost silence, and then essentially need to like walk ourselves out as well afterwards. So it was just a very he was very stressed out, he was very upset, and you could feel that at the end of the conversation. Whereas as I said, very polar opposite to someone like Ilmar Compass, who may have internally been equally as frustrated with the questions that I was asking him about like his business partner and like whether or not they've committed fraud. Internally, I don't know what he was thinking. He may have been like, this fucking guy, how dare he? But externally, you don't see any of that. And so that's kind of a big difference in those two. And then I guess you've felt this already before, but like Argo is the other kind of main, like the big interview that people remember from the first documentary. Argo was, I think people responded very warmly to that interview because he's sort of an open book. You ask him questions and he, it feels like you get a very authentic answer that can sometimes land him in trouble, I think.
Yes.
For example, in that interview, he I can't remember what the question was that led to it, but he sort of voices his criticism for an update that just happened to Disco Elysium called the collage mode, which he felt wasn't in keeping with the vibes of Disco Elysium, of what Disco Elysium is trying to accomplish. And when you're watching that as the audience member, who probably has a similar opinion, if you really care about Disco, I don't think it was a very popular update. It's like, oh man, this guy is, he's telling it like it is. But on the flip side of that, I think if you work at ZAUM and maybe you worked on the collage mode and then you hear your coworker say that, it can cause some
Yes.
difficulties for Argo outside of the interview itself. They were all really interesting for different reasons. And again, we'll talk about this in a second. It's a big reason why I wanted to structure the documentary in the way that we did, to give you the moment to feel what I've just described. Because I actually, having watched it, I think you can get a lot of that from those 3 interviews. You do get a sense of the different personalities involved there.
Yeah. No, I think it's so I mean, I was one of the angry mob, to lay my cards on the table here, Chris. And I've reflected a lot of my own feelings on the documentary, particularly the Robert interview. And everybody has pointed out the differences by now. And I know that you explained a little bit in the second documentary and the structure. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, actually.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. But I did want to just remark on the mention of Argo in Robert, and I have talked about this a little bit before. You could see a visible reaction in Robert Kurvitz's demeanor when you reveal that it's Argo Tulik that has said some things about him. And I think you undoubtedly got an extremely emotional reaction from that point onwards, which is probably what drove the awkward silence.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely. Yeah. I don't. There's no judgment on that. Like it's outside of who's right and who's wrong in the broader picture. It's a very painful thing to hear. I think, like someone that used to be really close with feels that way about you and has said something publicly about you. Like I don't think that's whoever you are in this story. Like it wouldn't be an easy thing to hear. So I'm not saying it with any kind of great judgment or anything. Like it was obviously uncomfortable to be in that moment, but it was an uncomfortable line of questioning that I brought up. So I totally get that.
Just before so I will come back to that point, but I'm just curious about there are a couple of other key players, certainly on the ZAUM side, which some of them appear, some of them don't. So the appearance of Justin and Caspar in particular, how did that come about? I know that you had contact from the management as such, right? Kind of asking, but how did Justin and Caspar then come into the?
Yeah, so I think this bit sometimes gets a little bit confusing, but in terms of the ordering of what happened, and I'll go into. I've spoken about this when I talked about how the piece began, right? When we went to the Estonian court and we started speaking to people off the record, and eventually ZAUM management gets in touch, and after a back and forth, it's agreed that we're going to do a sit-down interview with Ilmar, who's going to respond to these claims being made against him. Then after that had happened, Ilmar and the rest of management kind of communicated, from what I've heard from Argo anyway, that they felt that the interview had gone well, and then Argo and Dora say that they were concerned about what that might look like. And if you have, for example, on one side of this documentary, Robert and Rostov, and then the voice of ZAUM as a whole is represented by Ilmar, they, I think quite rightly, didn't feel comfortable with what that might say about what ZAUM is. And so at that point, Argo was put forward to, he got in touch to offer to be interviewed. He did ask for permission. Everyone who went on the record asked for permission to do so, because, I mean, if you're in a situation like that and you give an interview about such a crucial thing at your company without asking for permission, it's obviously probably going to lead to some results afterwards. And after we spoke to Argo, and I think Argo felt that interview had gone reasonably well, that gave the confidence to some of the other staff members to also speak to us, some of whom, maybe all 3 of which I'd already been speaking to off the record before then.
Okay.
And so that's when we ended up speaking to Caspar and Justin and Petteri, all also kind of add their voices to the piece at that point.
In hindsight, I don't know how much of the inside story interview and some of the stuff that Argo and Dora have said, and I am conscious that I reference Argo and Dora a lot and have certain biases, so I do need to be careful with how I frame certain things. But it's been reflected since that perhaps Justin and Caspar were part of a damage control campaign, because Argo, if we know the timeline to be the timeline and what Argo is telling us, things were already really frosty within that studio. Did you get any sense of that when speaking to the likes of Caspar and Justin?
Not at the time. Obviously, I've heard about that since. But that has also coincided with like things kind of imploding at ZAUM again. At the time, and I speak about this in the second documentary, it really did feel like a united front, that the workers outside of Ilmar, and some of these people have more senior positions, like Justin and Caspar are kind of in lead positions at that stage, kind of had been kind of counterparts to Robert and Rostov, but they'd also been some of the people that had worked most closely with those people. Like Justin had worked extremely closely with Robert, and Caspar had known them for a really long time and had worked knew Rostov really well. And so it felt important to hear their perspectives. But at that time, from all of those four people, from Argo, from Justin, from Caspar, from Petteri, it felt like a group of people who seemed genuine in wanting to represent the employee side of ZAUM. Obviously it's they can't really talk about whether or not the ZAUM has been stolen. That kind of side of the story is just not something that any of them had inside knowledge of, and so we end up talking to them about their relationship with those that have been forced out of the company, in particular Robert. But yeah, at that point, it felt like a genuine united front.
Yeah, and to be fair, I think like at the time when you've got Petteri, Argo, Justin, and Caspar all okay, they had their own different gripes with their own personal experience, but there was a theme of Robert. I was caught between Robert and Rostov in my brain there. But Robert was someone that kept propping up as problematic, I think, if we wanted to use a broad term. So I guess I kind of understand. I mean,
it's interesting that since then, obviously, now that Argo and Dora left in the way they did, and feel very strongly about those people in particular, they feel very aggrieved by Justin and Caspar, I think, and the way that they ended up working together. But even actually at the point that we interviewed them, I now understand that there had been tensions that had arisen between those people beforehand. It's something, again, I talk about in the second documentary. I can somewhat appreciate why it didn't come up in that piece, because we kind of interviewed them in this sort of sweet spot where things on Locust City were maybe going as well as they ever would. Like it felt like this game is actually going to get made and it's going to be really cool. And it felt like those people had kind of come together. And I think the feeling amongst those four was really, like I say,
there was
probably
still
as good as
hope
it had been. Now we know that even at that point, there had already been issues beforehand, and those issues would only go on to get worse.
I'm going to ask you one quick question, and then I'm going to ask my least friendly questions of the bunch, Chris, which feels horrible. Now that now I've had an hour speaking to you, I feel bad about writing them. This is just
don't be at all. This is the interesting part to talk about with. Honestly, we opened the second documentary with it. Like the criticisms of the first.
Yeah. Well, I first want to understand there is this boogeyman financial criminal, Harville, who never appears on camera or anywhere. Did you have interactions with Tonis?
Yeah, we did. We they were only over email. He answered some questions that we had and provided some evidence to support some of what he was saying, which is included in the piece. But he never does a sit-down interview with us. At that point, actually, we were pretty okay with it being Ilmar to be the face of that, because he is, on paper, the person that has profited here. He is the majority owner of ZAUM. obviously there's lots to unpick there, which you can watch the documentary if you we don't need to get into it too much, but the relationship between them is very interesting, and to what extent is that actually a shared ownership, blah blah blah. But at that point it felt right and fair that Ilmar should be the one that has to be put in the spotlight. We did ask if Thomas wanted to be interviewed, and actually in the second documentary we were much more clear about that we specifically wanted to talk to him of anyone, because actually what I now understand about the way that company works, yes, Ilmar is the majority owner, but in terms of the day-to-day running of the studio, Thomas Harvel is the person that does that. He is like, I was shocked to find out even now, Argo has only met Ilmar Compass like, I can't remember how many times. It's like a handful of times. It's certainly less than 5 times. Insane to me. Like, they've obviously had video calls and meetings and whatever, but in person. And so yeah, I would have loved to have got Thomas Harvel first time around. Second time around, I really would have liked it, but he just didn't want to do it. But he did answer our emails to begin with.
Yeah, I based on my again, everyone knows my sources by now, I think, but yeah, it sounds like it would have been corporate suicide to put Thomas in a situation similar to that of Ilmar, because my understanding is he's way more reactive and way more emotional about these kinds of questions about his integrity than Ilmar, who is very cool, calm, collected, and
I'd say some of that came across in the emails we had. I don't think this is even an unfair thing for him to have raised, but his partner Anu Raymond is a more significant figure in the first documentary, because she owned a part of one of the companies involved, and Ilmar even says it pretty upfront to us that
are they part
that's an indirect way that Thomas is involved in the company, but we needed to kind of draw attention to Anu Raymond's existence in this in our documentary, and I'd say it wasn't aggressive, but he was certainly like, some emotion came up in the way that he responded to like asking us to be sensitive to how she would be treated. So I think I saw a bit more of a
mask off down.
I don't mean that in a disparaging way at all. I understand where it's coming from, but yeah, he definitely does seem to be, from everything we know, quite a different character to Ilmar.
Yeah, a bit more of his heart on his sleeve, I guess. Okay, so you've talked, so in the second documentary, the follow-up, you talk about the challenge of timelines and framing, and I've touched a little bit on the fact that there was a theme developing amongst some of the people, including Argo, who many would expect to be a staunch defender of Robert. So there was a theme of, and I guess a lot of off-the-record stuff about Robert's nature. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you address your own personal demeanor and approach to the interview, and that is somewhere I've seen in the community where people see a difference in the overall vibe of the documentary. And I observed this myself, Chris, I have to be honest. I felt that you had a little bit more gusto and a little bit more passion, maybe even a level of anger towards Robert. And I wonder how much the work that you'd done between interviewing Ilmar up to that point perhaps influenced you, and how much do you reflect on your own disposition in that interview, and how would you respond to that criticism?
Yeah, no, I think there's a fair critique there. We did touch on it slightly actually in the first documentary. I kind of interrupt the interview in the sort of present, like me in front of my PC back at home, to say that like I didn't love how this interview went, and some of that is just coming from the fact that, like, as we touched on earlier, it was kind of an unpleasant atmosphere for everyone involved, I think, and that does change the feeling of an interview, and I definitely felt that in the moment. However, the broader point that you're making about my kind of personal feelings towards Robert compared to when I spoke to Ilmar, it's something that we do I do talk about in the first kind of 20 minutes or 30 minutes of the second documentary is kind of dedicated to looking back at some of this critique. And I think there is a fair one there. I think the part of the reasoning for that we kind of landed on was when we look back at what we, as I said earlier, found to be one of the most difficult parts of the story, which was like the edit at the end. I do genuinely think that we had a lot of what I described as like the right pieces to tell the story. The way we arranged them ended up causing some issues, I think, which was, the very first section of the video is all about, did this financial fraud happen? Untangling all of these company structures and building a pretty solid case that, not that Ilmar Compass has stolen ZAUM. I still don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if there's a crime that's been committed, but certainly there are some like really big question marks about what went down there. In particular, there's just almost no written record of like these really big decisions that got made to do with him buying out the other major shareholder at the time, and he claims that everyone else was on board, including Kurvitz and the others. But there's nothing to back that up. And so I think we do a good job of laying that out. We then interview Ilmar and challenge him on it. I think some people would have liked me to have just like screamed his head off, maybe in that moment. That's each to their own on that. I think what I was trying to do was get as much information as possible out of that interview. A lot of it for me was like laying out a series of events and getting him to confirm them, which he did. I think a lot of what people know about the sort of financial interactions comes from the work we did there. And yeah, maybe that could have been the tone of that interview could have been stronger in hindsight. I think I'd probably accept that. But then maybe the big mistake that I think we made was, and it's because of the timeline that I've already described to you. After that interview, Argo comes forwards, and then the others come forwards, and those people simply can't talk about the financial fraud allegations because they don't know anything about it, as far as I understand. Like that, they're not shareholders, they're not at that level, they weren't in those conversations. What they can talk about is actually, hey, we did have some problems with Robert in particular, and we feel like our experience as the workers at this company has been completely lost in this battle of the shareholders, which I think is a good and fair thing for us to talk about. Some people will say that we shouldn't have conflated these two topics at all. That's not something I agree with. But the problem that I think we got into is by then focusing on that for like 40 minutes, because we do Argo's interview and then we cut between the other three that came forwards. That's 40 minutes where you completely stop talking about financial fraud. And by the time we come around to the interview with Robert, I think that has sort of become, it feels like that's now the main focus of the documentary. Also, it's a little bit more tangible than the financial fraud allegations, because even to this day, unfortunately, we still have a situation where one side says, hey, like, we're telling the truth. The other side says, no, we're telling the truth. And the proof is pretty limited. And whereas the workers coming forwards felt maybe a bit more tangible. And yeah, by the time we speak to Robert, I think, the focus of the documentary, and maybe my focus as well a little bit, is kind of, okay, we do need to talk about the fraud again, but now it kind of feels like we need to get that out of the way before we talk about these other allegations that we've since heard. And it all just gets a bit messy and leaves with the feeling of, that one of those being more important than the other, which is I genuinely do not believe. I think they're both important parts of the story for different reasons. But yeah, you tie that in with the fact that the interview itself was quite an uncomfortable atmosphere. And it kind of leaves you at the end of the documentary. And there's I should also point out again, I do a better job of explaining this in the second documentary, where we kind of, I spent some good time trying to put it into words. Also, the final kind of statement we get from Robert sort of writes off all of the employees as pawns of Ilmar Kompos and Thomas Harvel, which I did genuinely find frustrating because, I felt, as I said, that there's been this quite united front, and that, you look at people like Argo, he's clearly like, I don't think that's, I think you can have different opinions on what he says in the interview, but I think describing him in that way just does not feel fair or appropriate. And I do get frustrated there, and it's right at the end of the documentary, and I think by that point we've just lost a lot of the feeling that was at the very beginning when we were talking about the fraud itself, and it feels like the focus has shifted by the end. Genuinely, if we were to do that first piece again, I think we have a lot of the right pieces. We would have done that ordering just differently.
Yeah.
One final thing I'll say on that. You mentioned you were part of the angry mob. Something that it took me 2 years basically to build up to doing a second piece, and we only would do the second piece if we had a moment to reflect on the first. Part of why it took that long was it was genuinely very difficult to. When we first published the documentary, there was not really a big backlash at all. In fact, I remember that day, like the Disco Elysium subreddit was engaging with it in a way that caught me by surprise. I thought there'd be a lot more heat in that community specifically, but across the board, people seemed to be appreciating the nuance of it. Obviously, a bunch of stuff then happens afterwards. ZAUM implodes again, and Argo and Dora, come out and have a lot to say about their time at the company. And by that point, everything feels like it's changed. And the first piece, I think, becomes this sort of like, it's a place to go and take your frustration about the story, honestly, because it's hard to get in contact with Ilmar or Thomas or any of the people that you might be annoyed with. And that was a place to take some of it. And people had really genuine, like, good critique of the piece. You've offered some of them, and I definitely think you're right to do so. But it got mixed up with a lot of just like wider frustration as well, and it took me ages to like lower the defenses again and be like, okay, what here do I need to reflect on? Like what's fair and what's just anger? A different person, probably a different team, may have been able to respond to that more quickly in the moment. Like I definitely thought about, we've been thinking about doing the second piece for a really long time. And there may have been other moments we could have done it, but I genuinely needed to sit with it for that long to be able to get to grips with it. That's a very long-winded way of saying I think that there's like a central flaw in the first documentary. I still think there's lots of really good stuff about the work we did, but there's a central flaw about it that I totally take on board. And I think for those that have watched the second, I think there's some interesting stuff to kind of pick apart in how that happened and how documentaries, the way in which they're structured, the way in which interviews are kind of staggered, like how that inevitably impacts the end result. And it's been, I feel pleased with where we got to in terms of being able to speak about it. It just took me ages to be able to feel calm enough to actually do it.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. And I know this is obviously something that you've thought about, you've written and spoken about in the second documentary. I appreciate it's a question that's been asked of you many times. And I do appreciate you giving your thoughts to that.
I don't think we'd answered it enough, though, that in fairness. So like this is part of why I wanted to do this interview, is like we kind of went quiet. I in a few comments here and there I might have like responded to certain things, but like we mostly kind of went quiet and just sat with it, and then 2 years later kind of reflected. So I appreciate the opportunity to actually be able to talk about that here as well to an audience that I know really cares about Disco.
Of course.
Which is really helpful. And I don't expect everyone to think that there may be other reasons people have that other issues that people have with the piece, and that you're very entitled to do so. I definitely have my own take on it.
Yeah, you're never going to please everybody, Chris. I think that's just...
I know. I don't know. I was thinking I want to please everybody, and I've become a goddamn journalist / YouTuber, which is not a good combo.
No, absolutely not. And I will just offer some thoughts of my own, just because I did mention that I was part of the angry mob, but I have remarked on this already when I spoke to Argo and Dora. But the new information that's come to light, and certain reflections I've had. I mean, I think you're right to have some anger at Robert's response, because we since learned that he had an even more direct response to Argo in particular. And I don't know if this is correct, but I'm presuming it was after the documentary, where he says that Argo would have to come and crawl back to him on his hands and knees if you ever wanted to speak to him again, like a dog, which I think is quite frankly disgusting for you to say about any other human being, really, not least your friend. And he is dismissive of what are very real critiques of his interactions with other people. And I do think that maybe the mob mentality lost sight of that. And I think me and others have now kind of reflected a lot on that in particular. And as much as
I bet he has as well, by the way. He's obviously not spoken very publicly since that piece. That was a really stressful moment for him and for Rostov and for the others. I'm sure. I'm not saying I think he's going to come out and be like, wow, that first documentary was great. I don't think he's probably not there. But yeah, I think a lot. I've talked about how my feelings have changed over the last couple of years. It sounds like yours have as well. I'm sure the people involved in this story, like I said, you speak to them in these really weird moments in their lives, particularly if it's something you need to challenge. It's like, it must be a really, uncomfortable process to be on the receiving end of. So I can respect that too.
I just wanted to add one final thing.
Yeah, sure.
All of that, of course, and this is where people will want me to make the point. None of it excuses Robert, of course, not being able to work on his own world and his own masterpiece. And I just wanted to make that point and think that maybe that's a reflection of where some people are at as well. And I do feel like I am at least in some way a reflection of at least a portion of the community, and those points have to be made. Just one final question on the first doc, because we've covered elements of my other questions already. Sure. We know that the folks at Red Info have pretty much gone radio silent, apart from like the odd. I mean, Robert did like a Fallout stream, which was very unusual, where he just played Fallout and didn't talk any disco at all. Rostov was someone who was actually keen to come on my documentary and now will not. And I get the sense that your documentary has been quite influential. How often they now are willing to communicate, and when they are willing to communicate, in what environment?
I think that might be, yes, definitely, 100%. They kind of, like you said, pretty much went radio silent for 18 months or something after the piece went live. They had been sort of radio silent before then. The only reason they first, this all comes to light is because of Martin Luiga's post, which I don't think anybody necessarily knew was about to happen when it happened.
Martin Luiga, if nothing else, is unpredictable and anomalous. But I do think that is starting to change. Robert did a presentation we use a small clip from at a French game show earlier this year. He's about to there's a no-clip documentary featuring Robert, Rostov and Helen and others that's I think being published sometime in September or maybe early October. I don't know. He's changed the date a lot.
Yeah, I mean, but partly because of us. So sorry about that. And so I think that's maybe starting to change. It feels like, again, I think there's been some time. I don't know if healing has necessarily happened or not. I think there's still a lot of, deep hurt in this story. Maybe that always will be, but it feels like, I mean, even seeing ZAUM now being ready to talk about Project C4, obviously that's come with its own backlash once again. But like, they were probably ready to talk about that game earlier than they did. But everyone has kind of gone quiet, letting the dust settle a little bit before starting to venture out of their caves again.
There's also an element of, and Argo and Dora talked a little bit about this, despite being the two people who continue to talk about this story in particular, but that's another conversation. But certainly in the conversations I've had and the observations I make about the news cycle around Disco Elysium successes, it seems to be now that people are trying to make sure that when they do speak, it's about something new, something positive, and something creative, rather than the bullshit, right?
I really hope that's the case. Yeah, ridiculous me saying this given the work that we've done, but it is absolutely exhausting. Like following all of this stuff. I know it's so funny for me to say that, but yeah, I genuinely hope that is the future of this. Like they've all got, there are 5 different studios now with games that they can be talking about. Yeah, I suppose that is the difference between now and then. There is now a whole set of new green shoots that may want to get the attention instead.
Yeah, and I've made my own personal vow I'm not going to talk about the drama after this year. I've got a couple of more, obviously this interview will go up. There's a few more pieces which I want to just do some small stuff on, and then I'm done with it, to be honest, because it is, as you say, it's exhausting.
I think I'm done with it as well. Honestly, the a big part of part of the reason we didn't do the second piece for so long is that we needed the time to reflect on what we just discussed. But like the other part was these 2 videos, more than pretty much anything else we've ever done at People Make Games, they are all encompassing and in a pretty unhealthy way as well. Like I talk about like you have to be obsessed with the story for that long. That's one part of it. But even just for a small team to like create these sort of 2.5 hour documentaries with all these moving parts, all these different things to consider. I think that there are definitely reasons for us to do that kind of work, and I think we will do more of that work in the future. I just don't know if I want to do, like, whenever we've done a Disco Elysium piece, it's like this last one, for example, I think I've been working on in some form for like 6 months. Other things have been going on at the same time, but there are stories that did not happen because we made this second piece, and that's a choice that we made, and I'm happy with. In this case, I wanted to do it, but like, I don't know. I think I'm probably ready to like pass that responsibility on to others now if they want to do it, because I can feel the stories that we haven't done for sure. Anyway, speaking of which,
speaking of which, you obviously you've tried to approach the similar crowds of people, people who now know exactly who you are and what you're about. So I just wonder how impactful was that for you in trying to get information and get some of these questions asked, and how did you have to approach this documentary differently in regards to that?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely changed the whole thing, really. Like everyone that we wanted to speak to, either on the record or off the record, we didn't have to pitch what we were doing, really, or who we were. It was that it was already established. And I would say on the Oggo and Dora side of the story, your listeners will know from previous episodes of the show, like they've always been very supportive of the first documentary, and they trusted us to tell this second part of their story. So on that side, it made the interview with them easier to organize, because they knew what we were about and what we were doing. I would say elsewhere it was trickier. Like we would have, I reached out to all the main players from all the different studios that we covered in this second piece, and in some cases we got comments back. Like obviously ZAUM gave us written comments this time around rather than interview. I think the difference, like that's because I think the reason we got the written comments is because of the first documentary, but the reason we didn't get them on camera was also because of the first documentary. Like I think they're like one and done on that front. I reached out to Red Info to get some comment on a couple of things, and I did receive replies to my emails, but they were not interested in providing comments.
Who was their representative out of interest at Red Info? Did you get like a management type?
Yeah, it's their new CEO, a guy called Jan Hendrik, I think his name is. He's a former Estonian politician, union guy, who has been involved with them since the beginning, I think, but I think now has a formal role with them. And when I spoke to Riaz, for example, when that happened, the existence of the first documentary played a huge role in the dynamic of those conversations. And so
Mm.
it was a blessing and a curse, really. We had more authority because we'd done the first one. We didn't have to prove that ourselves in the same way, but also some people involved in that first documentary don't like the first documentary, and that probably closed some doors at the same time.
Yeah, I'd have to say my immediate observation was just how sanitized the ZAUM in particular's responses were compared to sort of, I mean, Ilmar is clearly, you know, he's sanitizing his answers, but I don't know, there's something slightly different about having a face and a body.
I actually think even though they were sanitized because they were written and they were short, but
Yeah,
I think they had a little bit of frustration in them. Like they used some
do you?
language that you don't quite expect from a corporate body in the same way. Yeah, like even like including like it was in relation to Argo and Dora, but like yeah, there was some like pretty personal critique, I think, that they included, which I caught me a little bit by surprise, I suppose. I don't think Ilmar would have said it necessarily in the same way if it had been him. But yeah, obviously we didn't get anyone on camera, and specifically this time around, we asked for Thomas Harville. That was who we wanted for obvious reasons, and yeah, it just didn't happen.
Yeah, that's never going to happen, I don't think. So we don't have legal counsel for the 41st precinct.
Yeah,
I definitely couldn't pay for the lawyer that you've got. So we'll be very careful in how we approach this next subject. But Riaz Muller, as you've mentioned, is someone who will be a familiar name to everybody with an interest now. Just what was your experience of entering his sphere of influence? How did you find him as a character? What was it like engaging with his team?
I think he is another enormously interesting character in this story. To me, he's like a wrecking ball that kind of he obviously entered the story after everything else had already gone down. And I mean wrecking ball not in terms that he's trying to smash everything to pieces, just in terms of the impact that he ended up having. He didn't come in and try to invest in one company and you know, pick the winner and try to be a part of whatever comes next. He invests in two different ones which are direct competitors to each other, and actually tries to invest in a third. Out of 5, I don't even know if there may have been conversations between. I would not be surprised if there have been conversations between him and Red Info. I don't know that about. It feels like he wants to be involved in all of it. Which is really interesting given his background has nothing to do with games, nothing to do with Disco Elysium. And in fact, his particular world that he comes from, he's a very like, got that tech founder culture. It's not necessarily the type of person you would expect that would gel that well with a lot of the people in that make these games. And in fact, I think that explains some of what happened. I diplomatically said that I think Argo and Dora and Riaz they come from very, very different worlds, and they were always maybe going to explode if you kept them close to each other for too long. I think so. Obviously what we end up getting in the piece are written statements from Longdew Games, but what preceded that was a lot of emails and video calls that I had with Riaz that were off the record, building up to him feeling comfortable providing those statements, which we felt were really important to include, because obviously some huge allegations are being made against him. And in those conversations, he seemed extremely stressed out. I think.
Interesting.
I mean, everyone in the story is extremely stressed out. Obviously, I think what maybe he was struggling to deal with, and this is armchair psychology. This is not something he said to me, but my read on him is that he's used to investing in businesses and play and moving in that world and signing contracts and making the right business deal at the right time and all of that high pressure environment. What I don't think he's used to at all is being in the like viewfinder of a fandom. I think I think that completely freaked him out. which is somewhat understandable. But as a result, I don't think he was always like the calmest person to talk to. There were some pretty implicit suggestions that we might face legal action if we published the story, and he felt there was grounds to, or that Argo and Dora might. At one point, I remember he asked me if I knew what defamation was, which I thought was interesting.
Wow.
It's just a slightly like.
How are you? Where are you from? And do you know what defamation is?
Yeah, I think there's two things that I felt with that, which was obviously it's a suggestion that there might be a defamation suit if you fuck this up. Obviously, that's what that means. But also, like, I've been doing this job for a long time. I studied journalism at university, and we did pieces about. We've gone after Roblox before, like we talked about earlier. Like, we've had experience. It just felt like quite an undermining question to get asked. So he was an interesting guy. I think he, again, if put my psychologist hat on, I think he's totally freaked out by the fact that all of this stuff is happening as publicly as it now is, and maybe he'd hoped that this was something that would be simply within the realms of the courthouse, and that's how maybe that's where he feels most comfortable, which is the lawsuit that he has with Argo and Dora is a thing that gets sorted in court. That's it, the end. And what I would say to him is, if you do watch the first Disco Elysium documentary, this is a story that's famous for escaping the courthouse and becoming like a public battle, and that might have been a lesson to take away from that one. Although, I feel bad for even saying too much of this, but it was interesting. He also had his own critiques of our work that he'd like.
Did he indeed?
So often. So maybe he just didn't like our first documentary. I don't know. But yeah, interesting guy. The reason we had to spend so much on legal advice, more than we've ever needed to spend before, is largely, not solely, but largely due to the section we needed to cover on him, which involved publishing a lot of sensitive information belonging to Longdew or to him, and we had to handle that in a way that we felt comfortable doing, but whilst also making sure that we did right by the people involved. Because I will say, one final thing on Riaz, when in those conversations that I'd have with him beforehand, and this is something I do mention in the piece, so I feel comfortable saying it here as well. I would say, to begin with, he didn't necessarily know the extent of the documentation that I'd seen in relation to what happened. And I would say at that point, before he understood that, the way that he told the story back to me wasn't always, how shall I say it? There's an example in the piece that I talk about where, like, there's this huge, really important moment where, as Argo and Dora are working at Dark Math Games, and he's an investor there, and he gets in touch with them after having some concerns with the way his investment's going, and basically sends them this huge document detailing all the issues that he has. And we had to be very careful of the language that we used from that document, so as not to, let's just say there's some very defamatory things that were written. And that document, as Argo and Dora tell it, is the reason they end up like challenging the leadership at Dark Math Games and ultimately get fired and leave the company, right? Until he was aware that I'd seen that document, right up until the end, he denied that it existed. He said he didn't remember any such document having happened. It was 8,000 words long, and it directly like preceded this, the really dramatic moment at Dark Math where everything kind of changes. Either he's got quite a bad memory with that stuff, or he wasn't necessarily being entirely honest with us until he realized the extent of what we'd seen. So that was an interesting dynamic to sort of to walk, I suppose, with this piece.
Yeah, I would. I mean, the only reflection I have is he probably writes that many long essays and spends that much time in courtroom that, yes, they are environments that he could A, be completely comfortable in, and B, occasionally forget about, although I find it hard to believe he forgot about that particular document. But
who can say, David?
Who could possibly say? This is all speculation, of course. So I'll move on to some. We'll finish on more positive questions now. You did spend quite a bit of time with Argo and Dora over in Zagreb, and I guess you probably have a good understanding of what they are trying to achieve with the cooperative nature of Summer Eternal. And as someone who is an advocate for the workers, just what's your takeaway from what they're trying to achieve with that? And what's your view on their goals, and how do you reflect on it?
Yeah, I guess with the caveat of we don't, we've got to see this play out yet. It's early stages for the company. I think the structure of Summer Eternal sounds really interesting, and I'm very excited to follow its progress. I think Disco Elysium is obviously a very political game. It has a very its audience really cares about a whole range of political ideologies, but I think it has there's a significant part of the player base and
you can call them commies, Chris.
They're commies. They're all a bunch of commies. There we go.
Yeah.
I was trying to dance around that, and which I think is it's why the game is so enticing. But I think something that has kind of stood out to me in the past, particularly when I spent so long trying to unpack ZAUM to begin with, but then also the companies that have followed it, starting with Red Info and then the others. I think Summer Eternal is the first example of some of that really strong political ideology, sense of identity, actually making its way into the foundation of a new games business that hopefully has a long future ahead of it. And I think that's it's really noteworthy. I think I'm surprised that we don't see a little bit more of that in some of the other business structures, which feel a lot more typical. ZAUM, I know there was some attempts to try and get a union off the ground at that company, which were affected by the layoffs. But in terms of the actual structure of the company, it's super typical. It's largely owned by the investors, and some of the problems you could very much argue come from the fact that the creatives had to give so much away. Maybe Red Info manages to avoid that same trap, if that's a fair way of describing it. But with Summer Eternal, it's a whole different approach. It's from the very beginning, it's what outside of just trying to get the best deal and make sure that we always keep control. There's a whole philosophy about how businesses should operate and how creatives should make things, and I think that's really exciting. I have no idea how it will play out. I think it's really funny that if you look at the Summer Eternal site and the kind of breakdown of the structure, they use words like money lenders to describe investors, which is going to turn off some people, I imagine.
And I believe it has, yeah.
Yeah, right, okay. But maybe that's actually what they want. Maybe they don't want those sense people anyway. But I don't know. I think it's just really exciting to see someone put their money where their mouth is on that stuff. That hey, we made this really political game. Our audience really cares about this stuff. We really care about this stuff, and that's why we're making a structure in this way. I don't know if it'll be successful. I don't know what comes next, but definitely really interesting to me.
Yeah, and it's weird actually that you reflect on the fact that it is very much it's a game by communists for communists. As I understand it, Argo is one of the lesser politically charged individuals from that group. Dora, I think, would probably be more towards communism, and their organizer Alexander Gavrilovich is certainly someone who's been a driving force there. And it just made me kind of realize then that, well, actually Kurvitz is the most communist out of all of the original folk, and it strikes me as kind of strange that in the whirlwind of creating Fortress Occident and ZAUM, that it was never considered to be something like a cooperative.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as the people have already said before, particularly in that moment, getting like they talk about getting Disco Elysium out of Estonia was like a miracle in the world. And actually, when people are even Argo, who obviously has very strong feelings about Thomas Harvel and Karakenda these days, but mostly Thomas. Even he will still say like we had it was only because of people like Thomas that game gets out of the country and gets made. So yeah, maybe there's a element of like necessity, I'm sure, at that stage. I just think what's interesting now is like these companies that are following it. Yeah, like to what extent they're able to do with Red Info. We don't know what that's going to look like right now. They've obviously received a pretty significant investment from NetEase, but the creatives still control the majority of the company, and so who knows what that ends up shaking out as later down the line. I don't know, but I think what I like about Summer Eternals, they came out of the gate being like, yeah, this is the thing to hold us to account to from this point onwards. Like right now we're in maybe the easiest moment to dream up a future of what this game studio looks like before like reality.
Well, they didn't have a game to scrutinize it. Yeah, exactly.
But I respect the fact that they came out and said, well, this is the plan. And so like 10 years down the line, if it doesn't look like this, that's something to challenge us on. And I think that's super interesting to me.
Yeah. Couple more, Chris, and then you're free to go.
It's been fun.
Yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I knew I would, despite me being nervous about meeting an idol.
Yeah, exactly.
So, look, you've already reflected, and you said that maybe this is the end for your venture through this story. What do you feel like you've answered all of the questions that you would have liked to answer over the course of the 2 documentaries, or is there anything you still feel that if only we'd been able to do X or only we'd been able to do Y, that maybe you feel is still missing? Yeah,
we definitely haven't answered everything I would want to answer. Like the main one, more than anything, I guess, is has a crime been committed in order to secure the ownership of ZAUM? The very first question we had at the very beginning of this piece, I still don't know the answer to. I don't know if we ever will know or not. It really depends. Like what I imagine is the next stage at the moment is Kovitz won the case we talked about earlier, where they now have access to much more documentation, and presumably, if they can find evidence of financial fraud within that documentation, we'll see a case follow it to prove
that was very recent. I meant to remark earlier that was only this year, right? If not,
I think it was actually towards the beginning of the year, but it didn't maybe get picked up right away because it's a bit it's a bit of a difficult thing to make sense of, and it's not like Red Info came out being like, hey, we won, like because really this is, I guess, a stepping stone to what may be a larger case. There is a very real chance that case never happens because they can't either a crime wasn't committed, or they can't find proof of it. Obviously, those are very real possibilities. And more than anything, I would just love to know the answer to that question. I think there's obviously, a lot that can be said about outside of the findings made by a court, or whether or not something be proven as a crime. Is it ethically correct, the situation we then end up in? Obviously, that's something you've spoken about, and many others have, and a very valid and interesting thing to discuss. But I would love to know if financial fraud did actually take place, and that if I knew how to find that out.
Well, that's why courts are there, Chris.
We'll see.
You can only do so much.
But yeah, I don't know if I honestly I said this after the last one. Honestly, like it's hard to imagine ever going back to it because it's a fascinating story. Obviously, there's so many interesting people in it, and the story is just there's just so much going on. I think it's endlessly interesting. It's spawned things like your channel, honestly, right? Like a lot of the intricacies of what's happened here. But in terms of working on it as a reporter, there are a few things that I'm kind of keen to maybe get away from for a little bit, which is it's a really messy story with a lot of personal dimensions to it. There's a lot of people that don't like each other, and and that's gotten very public and very hostile, and that is that presents a lot of challenges when you cover those kinds of stories. It's something where like there's this key part of it where the evidence just isn't there. That's frustrating to kind of the proof required to answer that central question, it was never made available to us. That's obviously a problem. It's a game that people care so deeply about and feel so aggrieved and hurt that, like, you know, Disco Elysium 2 isn't getting made. And if it does get made, right now at least, it doesn't look like Robert Kovitz is going to be involved in that. And it's just a really exhausting, messy story to keep going back to. I'm glad that we've done the two that we have. Obviously I find it really interesting, but I think I'm just keen to report some stories that don't hit those particular flavors right now. I think I need as you said at the beginning, we've done with your audience will know us just for the Disco Elysium stuff, which I really appreciate, but those are two stories amongst many that we've done. I'm kind of keen to flex some different muscles, I think.
Yeah, and a reminder that you do have fun stuff like the Farming Simulator esports video, which is honestly, we spoke on the phone a couple of months. It was one of the things I was keen to say. By the way, I really, really loved that.
That's so cool.
It was very unexpected, and I think probably like you with your boots on the ground, it's the kind of thing where I was like, this can't be interesting. And
yeah.
I was like, this is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
So
it's a big part of that keeps our mental health in the right place, and also keeps the channel from feeling too. I don't want every time a video pops up in your subscription feed, not that anyone uses subscription feeds anymore. But when a video pops up for People at Games, I don't always want the reaction to be, oh, this is probably going to be a little mentally taxing to deal with. Cool. So sometimes I think what we do is when we work on something serious, we try to like balance that with some more lighthearted stuff as well, which we still put, you know, a enormous amount of effort and resources into. That Farming Simulator, we follow a team like across Europe basically as they compete. And so we do it in the, you know, a similar PMG way, but god damn does it help to just like do a story like that. I tell you what, I would have been absolutely gutted if, as we were working on that Farming Simulator Esports League piece, it turned out there was just like the most outrageous controversy brewing under the
can you imagine
the surface. I think I would have had to quit. That would have been it. I'm like, I need a different job.
No, you do amazing work, Chris. And I will ask the final question. You talked a little bit about what's next for PMG, but just remind people what your next project is going to be, how people can support you, and how they can get access to that stuff early, all the good stuff.
Cool. I think so. I mentioned earlier that we're doing this kind of long-running piece on the World of Warcraft Union as it kind of fights its first major battle. That's going to be published God knows when, but we are working on it. In the meantime, we have a couple of pieces that should happen in the next 2 months, I think. One of them I can't yet talk about, but it should be really interesting. The second one, I really like to, in reference to the Palestine piece we talked about earlier, I would like to do a piece exploring the BDS boycott of Xbox, which is a call to, in a number of different ways, stop buying Xbox products, to pressure Microsoft to end its relationship with the IDF and the genocide. And we are going to do a piece, exploring it through this game's angle, which is Xbox is being targeted. Why is it being targeted? How does that work? And we're going to speak to some really interesting people. And that's probably coming up reasonably soon. And the main way to support us is just watch our stuff. Honestly, we're on YouTube mostly. That's the easiest way to find us. Just have a look at People Make Games, and as a treat, try watching something that isn't a Disco Elysium documentary and see what you think. Because I promise we made other stuff.
Yeah, and it is really good. It is really good. There's some really fun stuff in there. Like I haven't mentioned, you did the space simulator thing in London, which is really cool.
Sometimes we dress up and do
Yes, it looked like you were all having fun, which is like, you know, when you come to YouTube for entertainment, there is some stuff to be found on PMG, and you are, I guess, out of typically British politeness, not referring to your Patreon, so I'll do it for you. There is, as we've already discussed, there's a lot of money and funding that is required to do the work that you do. There's a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of flights to be on board, lots of lawyers to talk to. So what is is it patreon.com/people make games?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
there you
go. We're very, very thankful to people who support us that way. I used to work at, as I said earlier, other games publications where I tried to do bits of this work, but the typical like ad model that most of those businesses need to operate under, it's very hard to make that support long form journalism. So yeah, Patreon has been kind of a revelation for that kind of work for us. But yeah, thank you for mentioning it. That's kind.
Yeah, no problem. If we want proper journalism to happen, then we need to be willing to support it. So, well, Chris, thank you so much for giving me 2 hours of your time today.
That was wicked. I really enjoyed speaking to you.
Yeah, I absolutely loved every minute of it, and hopefully we cross paths sometime in the future.
Definitely. Yeah.
Otherwise, thank you very much, and cheery bye.
Cheery bye.